Hello and welcome to this video on the VENO Orbit from Venus Instruments. It's a dual-channel polyphonic sampler for audio and CV with no menus for quick and powerful manipulation and playback of your sources. Here's what's to come in the video. This video is sponsored by Venus Instruments. So following on from their module debut, the VENO Echo, Venus Instruments have created the VENO Orbit. And I've been trying to sum it up in as few words as possible, and I think the best approach is to think of it as a set of powerful, flexible and simple to use audio or CV buffers. Venus Instruments have summed it up much nicer in their product info, saying that the VENO Orbit is a dual-channel, polyphonic, experimental sampler designed for live recording and manipulation of audio and CV. With an immediate user interface and no menus, one knob per function, and intuitive LED feedback, the module is both quick and flexible, allowing for maximum creativity. One thing to note up front, if you buy a VENO Orbit, there's going to be a firmware update on the Venus Instruments website. I'll link that below. It's just a simple drag and drop of a file onto the SD card. So there's a timing marker on screen if you want to skip ahead to the patches. There's a very detailed set of chapter links down below in the description for you to skip ahead and use this as a reference to return to. But for those that like a verbal feature rundown, here we go. The VENO Orbit is a dual channel unit that can operate in dual mono or linked stereo modes. There's transport controls for play, reset, pause, stop, record and reverse per side, and you've got toggling trigger inputs for external control of play, record and reverse. There's also a clear per side to delete things, and also an undo to undo and redo your overdubs. Each channel has a circular LED ring showing back the start position, the length, the playhead positions of your buffer of audio or CV. And you've got CV control over start and length that add to those manual controls. Each side can record into and play back across 4 different layers, again with CV input over those layers. And in unlinked mode, you can control each layer on these faders, and in linked mode, you get a decoupled recording and playback control, where you can control the recording layer with the red LED and control a playback layer with the blue LED. And this allows you to listen to one thing while silently and discreetly recording into another, or you can set those record and play layers the same and monitor what you're recording. Each channel has its own input. Input 1 normals down to input 2, and there's a shared input level control for both sides. This goes from silence up to unity gain, and for CV inputs with that level up full, unity gain means it's suitable for volt per octave input recording. I haven't needed external quantizing when working with volt per octave pitch information throughout the video. Inputs can be audio or modulation, and for that there's an input type switch. With the switch in the left position, both inputs are AC coupled, suitable for audio. In the right position, they are DC coupled, suitable for modulation signals. And in the middle position, channel 1 is AC coupled and channel 2 is DC coupled. And it's worth noting that as well as changing the input type, it does change the behaviour of some controls. With the attack and release for the audio settings here, going to modulation input types, these change to be rising and falling slews. And the behaviour of the layer select changes too. In modulation mode, this is instantly switching as you pass through those 4 layers via CV or manual control. And set to audio, this will crossfade between your layers. Again, you can do that via CV too. One thing worth noting is that if you hold the recording button for 2 seconds, it enables a transient detection that starts recording on the next transient. Perfect for grabbing precise attacks and the starts of sounds. There's a speed control, which controls both pitch and speed together like a tape machine, with markers around that control for ×1 unity speed, double time, half time and quarter time, but it isn't a stepped control, it's fully variable. Speed is also controlled via volt per octave inputs, and it's chromatically controlled via MIDI at the MIDI TRS input. The module has 3 playback modes, controllable per side or via the left side if these are linked. Momentary looping mode with a switch down is a gated playback, and with the input type as audio that activates an attack envelope when pressed, it will then sustain while play is held and then release. Latch in the middle is a continuous looping mode that is reset by the play control. Additional presses or triggers of the play input will reset the loop to the start point. And for both of those looping modes, there's a crossfade length control for smoothing the start and end point of your loops. With the switch up, this is poly mode, and it's a triggered one-shot playback that's polyphonic with up to 4 heads per side at the same time. The parameters are sampled when a playback is triggered, so you can be modulating the start and length controls with those 4 play heads moving through your recorded material and your recorded layers at the same time. If you trigger a 5th playback via press or external trigger, it will cut off the first one, similar to voice stealing on a polyphonic synthesizer. We have an EOC trigger output per side, and that fires at the end of the cycle of your audio or CV recording for each channel. And this is a sum of the end of cycles for all the layers, as each layer could have a different length and in that poly mode be playing at the same time. There's a MIDI TRS input, which allows you to control the playback chromatically via MIDI, and the note on and off messages trigger that playback and those attack and release envelopes. In poly mode, this is polyphonic, and it's also fully velocity sensitive. In linked mode, MIDI channel 1 controls both channels, and in unlinked mode, it's MIDI channel 1 for channel 1 and MIDI channel 2 for channel 2. There's a clock input, and that will quantize all the transport controls, putting the recording, playback, reverse, start and length controls onto those clock pulses. Samples that are loaded and recorded are also automatically trimmed to match the closest exact number of clocks. The start and end markers snap to the grid, and all of this makes it easy for tempo-locked on-the-grid overdubs and slicing and manipulating of your audio and CV. Mentioning overdubs, you can continually overdub into the layers by enabling recording on top of an already recording or playing sample. And you could even just leave recording on as a continual recording buffer for decaying loops and delay effects. You get an overdub decay control, and when that's all the way left, material that you record will instantly replace what was in the buffer before it, and it's fully variable in level to then all the way clockwise to the right, not decaying anything that's already there and just adding overdubs on top. There's the undo button we mentioned to remove the most recently recorded overdub, and you can press that to redo it as well. The LEDs under the bank encoder show audio VU style meters or CV meters dependent on the input type selection, but as you turn the encoder, you move through the banks on the SD card shown by colour and the LED position for those different slots. You simply push that encoder to load that into the module. Or you can go and select a different bank and slot and then hold save to save any recorded audio and CV into that bank and slot. If you want to put files onto the microSD card for playback, they need to be mono PCM WAV files at 16-bit and 48 kHz. The manual outlines this clearly, along with the file naming conventions, so check that out for those details. Now I think that's all the controls. I certainly hope it is with how long it took to go through. The module is so open and flexible with all the potential use cases, and to that point I've come up with a list of new ideas to explore while editing the video. Note, I'm recording this intro right at the end of that process, so they haven't made it into the video, and I'm looking forward to going and exploring these further ideas in the future too. I've tried to kind of zoom out and show more of the wider patches and the techniques involved in all these examples. I hope that keeps the ideas and approaches really clear throughout. There's multiple longer uncut patch from scratch rundowns exclusive to patreon.com/divkid, as well as all the bits that are in this video for those that are looking for a rawer kind of live, unedited, building patch from scratch experience. The timing index is on screen now and it's all linked down below. Skip around, come back and check out the different sections, and without further ado, let's dive in. So before we get into kind of wider, more in-depth patches, let's just have a kind of quick start, pretending here that this is the first time we've powered on the module, and we're just going to play some sounds. We'll record some sounds and go through the controls in a moment, but simply with this turned on, my output's in stereo with no further effects. Let's just rotate the dial, and the red bank here comes with some preloaded sounds to work with. We have a really lovely bank of orchestral sounds. And as we go through these layers, notice that these are crossfading in and out of different pre-prepared complementary layers of sound. And this crossfading happens when our input type is set to be audio. If you're modulating the layers with CV, they'll also crossfade. And a nice thing to note is that layer settings like reverse are per layer. I can be playing forwards in one and reverse in another. We can create one-shots and momentary play them. Let's find a point in that loop. Even in reverse. You can play with crossfade while you're latched looping. You can help with clicks and just smooth out those start and end points. So if I stop that and go to momentary mode, you're momentary playing your material. And again, this is both sides because I'm linked. If I unlink, we have our individual controls, and your attack and release here will make the onset of a play signal fade in, and release will make that release down gently as you let go. And those envelopes apply to external play signals too, not just button presses. It's a bit self-indulgent because I really just enjoy the sounds, but let's just load some more banks and just see what we've got. Different bits of Foley recordings. Let's just latch this again. Half-speed piano has really become a favourite thing of mine with the module. It's just such a lovely quality, not only to the sounds provided on that red bank that the module comes with on the SD card, but to that whole speed algorithm and just a general quality of audio recording and playback. What we can do is actually set up polyphonic multiple playheads, and let's do that with this sample here. If we stop, let's actually unlink, because you can have 4 per side. We'll go ×1 speed on this one, let's go half speed on this one, and poly mode on this switch instead of latched looping or momentary playback. And I can hit play 4 times, and I'm going to move the start so you'll see the playheads wrap around. Do the same on this side. These are still panned hard left and right, but they're now unlinked. We could reverse this one. So let's record something. Here I have a gate and a volt per octave signal into rings. It's two outputs coming in stereo into the module. I've set to suitable input level, and we're still coming out in stereo, linked mode, audio input type. This side will control this one as we've seen. Let's just hit record and I'll play in some notes and we'll get into playing around with the settings. And these can be up to 60 seconds in all of the 4 layers. I think that's enough for now. Just let this note decay. And as I'm in latched mode, as I hit record to stop recording, this will go back to looping round. We could instantly be repitching that whole sample. Playing in, say, reverse. Finding smaller loops with start and length controls. Playing with crossfade. We could unlink the controls. Let's set this playing in latch mode 2. Let's do some things, say an octave higher in reverse. And these are still panned hard left and right in the mixer, but you could of course just patch those two out anywhere, add effects to one, mix them in mono if you like. Stopping playback there. Let's go into the next layer. We'll actually go up. Both play and record, but what you can actually do that's quite interesting. In fact, let's do that. Let's play the first layer, so we'll link this again, and just set a kind of wide open playing of that loop. And I've set the recording layer, because I'm in linked mode, not unlinked layer selection, where it's individual per side. I'm going to go up and record into the next layer without hearing it. Stop recording. And as I now move my play up to the next layer, that's what I've just played in. It's quite nice to be able to decouple that recording from playback. You can of course record into a layer and hear it if we go up to say the third layer and playback select the third one too. And again, we could unlink, say find a nice reverse high loop. Go to a different layer altogether. And if we liked that, we could save it. Let's say rotate the bank around. I don't know, let's say the green one there, I'll hold save, plays the LED animation, and this is all now saved to the SD card, which you can take those files and do what you want, or reload it when you come back to the module. But let's actually record some clocked material and show a way of getting nice tempo synced recordings for things like beats. So here I've zoomed out, let's record a beat to a clock this time, and if I turn the input up, the input will always pass through to the out. Unless you're in different recording and play layers that we'll come to. So I have a beat. This is sequenced via the Eloquencer here, and it's the Modbap Trinity. And the mechanisms to record clocked and quantized and synced onto the grid, one that I've kind of landed on that works really well, is using this channel, Green Cables and Trace, which is an 8th note clock. I've sequenced it, but you could use any clock source there. And then because when you're plugging in a clock, this will quantize to the next available clock pulse any playing, recording, transport controls. I'm using this channel and this blue trace here that's in between these clocks, the last 16th note step in that bar. Now we could record on beat 1, and you might think record on the start of the bar, but because of the timing differences in lots of different sequences, lots of different modules are just slightly different, what you actually want to do for the most reliable recording I've found is trigger just before the step you want to record on. I want to record on beat 1 on this 8th note clock, so I'm triggering on the last 16th note step. I've got crossfade down. I don't want to fade the beat in any way because I know it's going to be tight with the timing on this clock. So the clock is in, the beat is coming in. Let's trigger a recording in latch mode. So we're listening to the input and the loop. I can remove that altogether. Turning it down, the audio input this is, we could start to overdub. So let's go in and actually change the beats. Let's say add some hi-hats to the offbeats. Let's change the hi-hat sound slightly. And I can start to overdub in new sounds and new rhythms. Let's go a lot quieter actually. So triggering record again. I pulled that cable a bit quick there, but with no input, we've overdubbed into this loop. Now we could record a layer that's then entirely different. So let's record into the next layer and listen to the next layer because we're in linked mode. I'm actually recording to both channels and just monitoring one of them. I find that quite useful so I can then have a copy of a pattern and then play around with it, maybe play in reverse, patch it elsewhere in the system. I always record to both channels, even if I'm recording one. So I've got some different sounds and a different pattern. Let's record this in. Again, turning down the input. I can use that play layer with input set to audio. Actually fade through these. So we can record CV, gates and triggers just like all the audio things that we've seen. We just changed the input type to be mod, and what we're currently listening to, nothing's recorded. I have rings being triggered by my sequencer. The volt per octave for rings is this yellow trace on data here. It's coming out of this channel of sequencing. It's coming into input channel 1, out of channel 1, into the volt per octave. And just so you can get a feel for that, if I turn the input level down, which when it's full will be volt per octave accurate, but if I turn it down, we're attenuating our pitch that's coming through. We also have those slew controls instead of attack and release controls for modulation, which you can play with as well. Let's leave those down. And let's just use the same method for capturing volt per octave. I'm unlinked, so on channel 1 we'll capture the volt per octave here, which was an 8th note clock to the module. It's the same clocking as the sequencer playing the volt per octave that's coming in. And I've got the trigger on the last step of the bar, which will go through to play rings' pitch. And what happens instantly, which you might think, hey, that sounds a bit weird, doesn't sound like volt per octave, is because the input is still playing through. So if I just turn that input level down, or even just unpatch it, this is now volt per octave coming from the captured loop on the VENO Orbit. We can do all the things we can do with audio. Make smaller loops. Play in reverse. Play it slower. If you've been playing around with speed and time, well, it will be on the clock and on the grid. It might not be right where you wanted it to be in terms of beat 1 in your sequencing, so I'm just re-triggering the playing with that last 16th note step. Now an interesting thing is that the input being active still, if I patch that back in and turn it up, we can use that like a transpose. So you could either be overdubbing in transpositions or live playing in new pitch sequences. If I change my sequencing up a little bit here, my input coming in here now is just a volt, 1 volt of signal, so we can use it like an octave transposition. So if I turn up the input, it will add that 1 volt, even without recording it, because the input passes through to the output. So I could actually get a secondary kind of transposing sequence and start to overdub melodic information. Root, octave fifth, root, octave fifth. Let's get this playing again. We'll do so right at the start of that grid by triggering it. So if the original loop playing, overdub is up full, so nothing will decay in level. Let's use that recording trigger, turn up our input with the root, octave and fifth transposition, and actually overdub in that transposition. Turning down our input. And we've now got one pitch sequence and a transposing one, kind of precision added on top. And we could take this away and we're free to sequence volt per octave, kind of freeing up that sequencer channel to do what we like. Now on the other side, I have a voltage source. It's the slider here just on manic. And I'll turn up my input level so that passes through input 2 to output 2, which chains across to modulate multiple parameters on rings. Let's just freely record just some live CV offset automation. I'll just hit record, it will be on the clock, but I'm not too precious about where or which clock it's on. You can see my motion on that red trace there. And if I put some fast bits in at the end, what we could do is actually use the slew. Let's go to those fast bits. A bit ridiculous fast kind of wobble of the fader. Would actually be slewing and smoothing out those fast motions that I recorded. So I could speed up all of that pattern. I've got CV automation on channel 2, modulating my parameters, and 2 pitch sequences, precision added to transpose, one on top of the other. There's lots of patches. I hope kind of taking a bit longer time doing a quick start has been a helpful initial guide to the module. So one thing I love about samplers and loopers is their ability to capture the whole essence and sound of entire instruments. In this case, this kind of entire modular case drone patch, and we're just listening to it through the VENO Orbit passing through. It's not currently recorded. But before I record it, because I really like pitching down samplers and the VENO Orbit is no exception here, let's tune higher, knowing we're going to pitch down, before we start to play and approach this as if it's just a rich wavetable type oscillator. So I'll hit record. This is linked in latch mode. Both channels will record at once. I could be kind of performing and moving controls myself while I do this. So stopping the recording, turning down the input. This is just the recording now on the VENO Orbit. And if we pitch it down, and what we could do to kind of enhance the stereo image, if you like, is unlink this and even play one side in reverse. Play around with crossfade time to make sure we get smooth transitions from start to end of recording. And we could really go in with the start and length controls, kind of zone in on different areas. Again, a bit like moving through a wavetable, but not quite. So now I have this pitched down, grungy sample of a whole drone. Let's play around with then using it and maybe reusing some of the modules we've captured to make a patch. So I was going to use this as a kind of stereo oscillator as the last patch went through, but I've decided to use it as 2 oscillators, and then because I've gained back all these other modules by sampling them and that whole drone patch, I can use Platts again as another voice. I can filter the voice that I captured that used the filter, reuse the effects as more standard end of chain effects. So the first voice, left hand side, I've just found an area that I like with the length and the start position. And because of the patch, not because the VENO Orbit is kind of lo-fi in any way, it's got this really lovely lo-fi, blown out, almost tapey-like sound. I'm saturating it, expressing just the mono output 1 in stereo with different envelopes to 2 sides of the stereo filter. It's just got all that grit. That into the VENO echo. And then the right hand side, I'm patching into 2 low pass gates, different rhythms striking them for stereo movement, and some effects that I'll remove here for now. Different pitch sequence to speed. And again, that's just got all that grit and character embedded in there. You could be much cleaner, and we'll do that elsewhere in the video. But that big old dirty, filthy stereo drone, I think makes for a really nice source. This one just playing in reverse. And having Platts back, which was part of that original sample, thought I'd make a quiet background LFO panning 5-step sequence. So big stereo drone, 2 voices, an additional voice that I've gained back. Super characterful. Like I say, it's got this kind of lo-fi blown out tape thing due to the patch that I sampled. And as one of many ways of using it, embedding a ton of character that you wouldn't get from, say, a single oscillator into this and then playing it like a dual oscillator, something I'm keen to explore more of. So part of the beauty of sampling droning oscillators is that we can play them via MIDI polyphonically, or do that kind of polyphonic overlapping note with CV and gate. Here I'm addressing it via MIDI. I'm going to add some vibrato here through the volt per octave speed control, and I'll come to a little specific thing with that in a moment. Here's some sounds from Platts. And unlike that last example where I kind of sampled the whole modular and had this really kind of like blown out tape, super vibey thing as kind of a dual voice, dual oscillator type setup, here I've sampled cleaner sounds in stereo. So the main out goes to the left, or input 1, and aux goes to 2, and I'm treating this as a stereo signal. So 2 different sounds in stereo, all recorded and played linked like a stereo polyphonic synth now. And as I just play some notes, you may notice that I've got some different sounds. I'm playing the mod wheel, and the mod wheel is modulating the layer. Now coming to modulating with this red trace and red cable, the volt per octave for vibrato here, there is, on this volt per octave and speed control, a kind of dead band around 0 volts. Now that's actually for tempo accuracy. That's a good thing for the module. It makes sure that that ×1 speed for kind of tempo clocked rhythmic things is really dead on. But for any kind of modulation, like heavily attenuated LFOs for things like vibrato, what I found is if you offset this above 0 volts, so what's coming in here is a mixture of an offset voltage and then my attenuated LFO that I'm controlling the amount of here. We get some lovely results, playing via MIDI, but modulating the volt per octave. And one more thing while we're on this kind of playing oscillators or your system polyphonically, when you're doing things like, say, arpeggiating, which I'll just get one going, these restart from the beginning, and we're kind of losing that richness that I've recorded throughout that longer recording. We can move around that with the start control. It's maybe more prominent on, say, the second layer here. As I move around that recording, there's some tonal variation. So I found that simply offsetting start, patching a bipolar LFO into start, and just down here, raising the level in an attenuator. We've got these short percussive notes. now moving around this longer recorded audio. Bringing up release, we can hear that polyphonic overlap. 4 voices on each side. So that's sampling your oscillators in stereo and making them polyphonic with different ways to address and play them. The MIDI played notes also respond to velocity, something you'd need to do in modular with a VCA and a whole kind of velocity patch to make things dynamic in amplitude and level changes. Now here, instead of playing in stereo, these sounds are recorded in stereo, I've unlinked them, and when they're linked, the MIDI channel 1 will address both sides, but instead I'm playing my DAW, which is Logic, with a MIDI file, 2 MIDI files across MIDI channel 1 for the left side and MIDI channel 2 for the right side, down that same cable. And it's like an 8-voice dynamic because it's responding to velocity, multitimbral because it's 2 4-voice sides, whole kind of synth from the VENO Orbit. Now having that in modular has meant that I can, of course, capture these sounds in as I originally did, but also patch out into filters for some nice kind of auto-wah filter wobble and modular effects. But first let's look at that MIDI velocity on channel 1, which is just the orange cable straight into the mixer. And if you're following along with the MIDI, which I'll blow up big on the screen, and listen for loud and quiet. Colour change on that MIDI piano roll shows velocity change, and that bottom automation layer are the MIDI notes as well. Now a slightly different pattern, if I mute this sound, plays into the other side, and because it's unlinked, I'm actually playing in reverse. I've got 2 LFOs, red and blue cables to start positions to shift through these Platts drones that are recorded and loaded into each side. Different attack and release settings, again they're shared when it's linked, so it's handy. We could say move to a different layer in this bank. It's coming into this filter with an LFO making that filter wobble. And this octave up, slightly longer held chord alternative to the MIDI pattern, playing the main layer, the one that you've seen on screen. Longer attack and release, into that filter wobbling, with some effects. Just works really well as an additional, as I say, multitimbral, a different tonal layer to the main one, but also then addressing that with different modulation in the patch. So main layer from side 1, that's the MIDI you can see. Nicely dynamic, again the velocity is the focus of making this patch really. And you could have just captured single decaying notes and whole patches. I just wanted to reuse these Platt sounds that I've loaded in, because I think they work really well here. So here's something incredibly simple, which is just playing back a single note, in this case a single sampled piano note. I'll pull the effects simply by not patching anything into it. And I'm going to use the start times here to push around this sample to some silence at the end, much like a mute, just so you can see when I do it on screen here. So on this side, at ×1 speed there, this is the whole sample, there's nothing else going on. Add a gate rhythm to play. And then the volt per octave from the same sequencer. Just very basic playing back of a sample. I'll drop this side, say down. Quarter speed there, 2 octaves down is quite nice, but let's go half speed. And then on this side, if I turn off reverse, it's the same piano sample, just a different sequence. They work well together, both playing at that ×1 speed. I prefer them in different octaves though. And focusing on this side, let's reverse it. So ×1 reverse on this side. Half speed, octave down, busier sequence on this side. Incredibly simple. It's just 2 gate patterns, 2 volt octaves playing a single dung, just a single piano note. And then washing that out in the wonderful VENO echo. What a lovely thing. So here we're going to look at looper techniques and the overdub capabilities of the VENO Orbit to build up from a single voice, which is Platts, the whole drum beat. This could be multiple layers, multiple sequences, melodic voices, chords, bass, drums, the kind of whole works. We're just going to build up a beat. So you can see my sequence in here, this grid on the Eloquencer. But let's just clear this both sides and I'll go through how to set this up. On my green trace and cables, so green trace on data, green cable to the clock input, I'm sequencing, or clocking it rather, with 1/8 notes. So this is like an 1/8 note clock. And when you're clocking, consider this kind of clock mode, all your transport controls, play and record for example, are quantized to the next clock. Now that's handy to quantize your button presses and recordings. And then as my trigger, blue trace and cables, I'm on the last 16th note. This will set this to record a bar of information and then stop. Let's start with some hi-hats. So we can always hear the input. Yellow trace here is my sequence for Platts. So if I go to the, say, hi-hat mode, patch in the input, and let's just put some 16s in, find a simple and let's go lower level, a little bit quieter, and I'm going to plug the cable in and out to capture this first loop. I don't want it to keep recording these hi-hats on top of itself. So it's recording and it's stopped. And if I turn the input down or even plug it out so it's really visually clear, we're now listening to this loop. Overdub is up full. So let's change the pattern, do like an 1/8 note thing maybe. Slightly different sound. Let's maybe go to the other output on Platts. That works for me. Let's hit record. Let's keep adding these up. I like these kind of dense layers of hi-hats. Let's do like a 1/4 note thing. Input back in. That sounds pretty good. Let's record. Let's do an offbeat thing. That works for me. Hitting record again. Let's patch the output of 1, this whole kind of quad layer of hi-hats now, into 2. This is unlinked. It's also set to latch. And let's just record it across so we have it here on a layer in case we want to go back to it or do anything creative with it. So we have these hi-hats there, we can refer back to them. Let's find a snare. Little background ghost note snare drum, let's record that in. And then let's go to a kick drum, so to the kick drum mode on Platts. That'll do. Hitting record. So we've built up a beat. Now if I go up to the other layer, that's still there from before. I'm just going to hit clear. I'm going to patch those hi-hats from the second channel into 1 again. And I'll record them in, but I'll maybe drop the speed this time as I do it. bit wonky, but we'll leave it like that for now. And let's build up another pattern. Let's go to a kind of 4 to the floor kick drum. Maybe a reverse thing. That's quite cool. Let's record that in. So here we're having some fun. We've recorded CV and gates. I'm transposing them. I'm modulating through different rhythms by decoupling the recording of rhythm on one side, side 2, and CV on side 1. And we can just play around endlessly. Let me strip this back and show you the 4 recorded sequences, and then we'll kind of build back up to being playful with them. So these were recorded into the module and saved. I actually did it yesterday. It's quite nice to come in and just load up sequences off of an SD card. And they were recorded with an 8th note clock, the same method I've done before, and then the last 16th note in the step has been my recording trigger. It'll also be my play kind of reset trigger as these play in latch mode. I'm linked, which is how these were recorded, and in link mode, this is your record layer select, this is your play select. So this is the first layer. Let's go to the second. And these are the outputs. Green is the volt per octave that comes into data and then controls the pitch on plats. Blue is the output of channel 2. It was triggers that were recorded, but using that attack and release slew. I'm creating decay envelopes. And they come through to control the level of plats. I'm not triggering plats, it's actual envelope controlling the VCA. Third layer. So again, different volt per octave, different trigger on the other side. And the 4th layer. And one nice thing, even in link mode here, which works both in link and unlinked mode, is to start to transpose. So as this is playing, if I add a voltage to the input 1, we can start to use this to transpose our pitch. Whereas input 1 normals to input 2, I don't have to be adding an offsetting pitch CV to my triggers that are outputting. So I'm just going to use a small cable, what you call a dummy cable, it's not connected to anything else, just to break the normaling. I can just kind of hang around on plats there. So side 2 is unaffected. And in link mode, you're recording into a separate layer to your playing into. So I'll select the same one, turn up this input, and a slower sequence at input 1 is now passing through to the output as well as the looped CV playing back. And we've still got that slew, which is all the way left just to cancel it out. We could slew those rising notes. Or just the falling. We could set those to be more even. So at this point, let's turn down the transpose, let's unlink, so we'll have individual layer controls for CV and gate. And I'm just going to use this trigger on the last step of the bar into play, just to get these playing back at the start. So I now have CV out of this side on layer 1, and I can play with my rhythm separately. So let's use an LFO, it's the yellow trace here, into layer, and we're just going to keep that clock running, keep at that rate. You could slow them down. It's quite funny, the idea of speeding up and slowing down rhythms. And you could sequence these in and out of half time, double time. Let's go back to times 1. Just re-trigger that play so it's in the right place. Let's use an LFO to its layer, just to modulate through 4 different recorded trigger rhythms. On the CV side, let's find a smaller loop in one of the samples. And there are some effects on the sound so you can hear notes echo around. There's some modulation of that sync sound. But I hope this is really clear. This is a rhythm coming out of channel 2. So it's just a quick play around with CV and gates. I find it a fascinating concept to capture CV. Could be something like a Turing machine or random rhythm generators that you're then capturing as you like them, running clocks and triggers in to capture them as well as triggering your other sequences, and then being playful with them, either alongside other sequences or even just using the VENO Orbit as your sequencer. So here I'm using the VENO Orbit as a delay, and a stereo delay in this particular patch. I'm kicking it in and out of reverse. I'll clear the recording and show you how to set up a stereo delay. So having hit clear, we can hear our input as we always can, so this isn't suitable as a kind of wet send effect. You always hear the input coming through. Now I'm clocking this, you don't have to clock it, but this is a 16th note clock, and relative to that 16th note clock, this is a quarter note clock. So to set a time base, I'm going to use the quarter note clock to kick in and out of recording. So patching this into record. Bring that down to tempo times 1. And this is just working like a loop. If I turn the input down, I've pitched down and it's just continually looping. But if I hit record again, so it's like an open, continually recording buffer, and I'm linked here. As per the overdub settings, we can fire sound into a delay recording buffer, or looper buffer if you like, that's fading down as per the overdub level. So if I set overdub around the middle, think of overdub now with this continually recording as a sort of delay level, a kind of mix amount, but also a feedback amount. Let's bring up the input again. We can play around with the delay time by playing around with length, and again this is linked, so this side will control this one. And it's changing length dependent on those clock pulses, so it's all clocked and in time here. And if we make speed changes, like an kind of analog delay, a BBD or something, we'll get a pitch shift with what's in the buffer, but it will settle back down. Same as we go back down. Shifts down an octave and then settles down again. We could unlink this and have separate time controls on the two sides. Now, as we've been exploring delays, I thought we'd push them into a kind of heavily modulated, mega crazy kind of pitch shifted stereo delay. Bringing up that overdub with an active, just constantly recording buffer, lots of modulation, without any delay. It's some synth sounds and snare drum sounds sequenced from Plats, just a sequence playing around. Now, I'll actually build this back up again. Let's remove the modulation, let's bring up the buffer, take off record, take off reverse, and clear. I'm unlinked, and I'm going to stay unlinked as well. Let's just record something without a clock. So that gives us a time base. And if I just pull out the right side, this is just mono now, and I actively keep this recording, I could play with speed, just like an analog delay, and tune in. Do the same with the length. Set up a delay time. Quite like that for now. Both sides again, in stereo. Overdub will still act like a feedback control. And I'm going to change from just stepped random, that's just completely random, to octaves. I'm going to randomly and probability sequence in octave changes. I'm patching that in to the volt per octave for speed on the left hand side. And then some stepped random, again swapping from previously just free running stepped random to just octaves bouncing around with probabilities from my sequencer. Patch that into the speed of the right side, volt per octave. I have some random gates that I'll use to modulate reverse on and off. And some more there on this yellow trace for the other side. And shifting just in octaves there, it's much cleaner, halving and doubling that delay line, or that buffer size if you like. It won't keep pitch shifting. It's not a recorded loop that's playing constantly that we can shift. It's those changes, that modulation in the buffer that gives that pitch change. Much like moving speed on an analog delay, it will settle back into the pitch at that particular rate, speed or buffer size. If we keep firing modulation at it, there's a lot of fun to be had. Now here I'm using the VENO Orbit. It's a bit like a granular kind of drone or grainy cloud generator. So we're listening here to the output of the VENO Orbit completely dry in the mix. If I just trigger each side here in poly mode, They're both playing a piano sample. Now I'm playing a keyboard, which is overlaid on screen here, and it's the oscillator that's the red trace here on data. It's coming out into a VCA, so I can use the gates on the keyboard to turn this on and off, so this isn't just being triggered by an oscillator constantly. So when I play a note, that yellow trace there will move from being a straight line to showing that the output there is the same pretty much as the input red trace. And when I let go of a key, it's just 0 volts, closing a VCA and not letting the clock through. Now that clock is coming into the div skip. That's probability throwing it to 2 different outputs, like a left and a right trigger, set to 50-50. And that's why it's bouncing between the 2 sides. Now the rate of the oscillator that's been coin tossed to the 2 sides in stereo here is controlled by the mod wheel. So if you watch my thumb, we can get into some high density, kind of scattered audio rate triggering. And as this is polyphonic up to 4 voices on each side, we can think of this like 8 grains of granular audio. I could shorten these. Let's just soften it so it gets a smooth kind of cloud of piano grains. The pitch of the keyboard is sent to both sides, and I can turn on an arpeggiator here. The arpeggiator's not running at any kind of relative clock rate to anything else. It's just providing this blue pattern of pitch changes that happen. So before moving on from granular ideas, I just wanted to play around with a voice. I've stumbled into this kind of frog croaky bass sound in the latch mode. Let's go into that poly mode, but first I'll let you hear this actual...
Where you and I are going. Greetings, my friend.
It's an old 1957 movie speech that's just playing on one side here, coming out in mono.
And remember, my friend, future events.
Go into momentary mode, that stops. Let's then go into poly mode and use an audio VCO into play as we have to do granular stuff in the previous patch. The rate of the VCO is on this slider.
Events such as these.
So on one side we have 4 overlapping grains. If you're using both, you could have 8. And you could use the other side here to be sampling these sounds. So let's put an LFO into start. And it's a slow triangle that's going to pull that position around in reverse and then back again like a time stretch. You can hear that kind of broken apart granular style time stretch. Fast VCO square wave triggers to play in poly mode. And an LFO slowly moving through the audio buffer. It's too much fun. I just wanted to play with a different sound source here, with audio rate triggering and granular synthesis ideas. Now here's something I found to be an interesting approach based on Adam from Venus Instruments telling me that in the momentary mode you can hold down the play or just add a constant gate, say a DC offset, a high voltage to play, and tap in or trigger in record for kind of stuttered in, kind of punched in bursts of sound. And he said he likes doing that with musical elements over kind of ambient field recordings. Now I'm in a totally different kind of musical context here with some breaks, drum and bass type stuff, but it led to an interesting kind of punched in clock rhythmic thing. Let's clear it and I'll go through what's going on. So to start with, I have some drums and I'm just going to leave them playing just to set the context of what's going on here. And using the keyboard that you can see to the right, I'm playing pitch into plats. That's going into ESU's trifecta, doing a big stereo affected sound. If I turn up the input, you can hear this distorted sound. And I can just play its pitch via the keyboard. Now as a bass, as in a bass state, as well as a bass tone, but in a bass state here, let's go with the method we used before of an 8th note clock. And the last 16th note step to record in time, clock in, let's trigger recording, and I'm going to turn this on and off and just get a 2-bar empty bass layer here on the VENO Orbit. That's bar 1, bar 2, and then we'll stop. So you have 2 bars of information now playing around the VENO Orbit. I'm going to turn up the sound, quite loud for this lowest note. I'm going to tap record just rhythmically, and it's going to quantize to the clock, so it's going to punch in kind of 8th notes of sound here across 2 bars. I find it an interesting way to work with rhythm. You could of course just use VCAs, filters, low pass gates for your sounds. But there's this interesting, punched in overdub. Overdub is up full, so it's not going to actually reduce the level of anything. And if I say go up an octave from this low note C to the octave above, we'll go a little bit lower in volume. Let's just punch in another rhythm. We could fade in some sound, actually fading in that input level directly on the unit. Let's do that with a minor third above. So I'll hit record. Let's go to, say, a 5th. Might be a bit too dense, but I'll try it. A little bit lower in level. Let's go the 5th an octave up instead. It's just a really quick patch, but I thought it was an interesting way of just rhythmically tapping, playing around, seeing what comes out. You could record that across to the other side, do something creative with it and come back. It's an endless kind of amount of possibilities. And I quite like this result. So here I'm playing back some files, so let's just highlight some sample prep to actually prepare your audio files for coming in to the VENO Orbit. I have my beats, they were 48K 24-bit stereo WAV files, some beats for one side of it and some synths for the other, but these need to be 16-bit 48 kHz mono WAV files. There's a converter suggested in the manual, so that's on screen now. And you can just see me setting up mono 16-bit WAV files that are 48 kHz, suitable for the module. And then there's specific naming for the colour of the bank, the layer and the left or right side, or side 1 and side 2, and which slot within that colour bank they go into. I just wanted to show that so you could see how you actually do it. It's not that complicated, and it's all in the manual. Now, on the module here, we're in audio mode, which means the input type and playback type will be slightly different to modulation mode. All the way left, this is AC coupled, and these actually crossfade between their layers. So if I mute output 2 in the mixer, which was the synth sounds, we can crossfade between 4 layers of drum breaks. Of course, this could be anything. It could be your melody and your wet affected melody, different Foley recordings, voice tracks. Now, just to hear that on the synth side for the sake of it, you can hear as I move that fader, I'm actually fading between the sounds in that bank, or sounds that you've just recorded, directing your session into those layers. Now that's going to apply to modulating layer as well, so you could be CVing in and out of these blends of layers playing back. But going into these actual input types where the playback will be different, if we go to center from audio where it's AC coupled, these are attack and release envelopes as we've seen in the video. In the middle, Side 1, or the left side, is audio AC coupled, and right is suitable for modular with no AC coupling. And all the way right, there's no AC coupling on either channel, and you can use audio in that modulation mode. The layers just switch instantly, which might be more useful for certain situations. Hearing that on the drums, instant switch, and that would apply again to your layer modulation as well. So even just for playback of audio, input type from audio to modulation changes from crossfading your layers to switching instantly. And you can use audio in either mode. So in this patch there's two things that I'd like to explore. One is using end of cycle triggering to kind of shift one from the other, where one loop finishes, hands off playback to another, that finishes and goes back, and also recording modulation. Now I have a simple sound, it's a saw wave into a stereo filter here. It's going into some effects, and I don't have anything recorded, so let's record some modulation and do this patch from scratch style. I'll patch in and out of the scope so you can see what's happening. I'll patch from an offset generator here into channel 1. Let's go to latch mode first. I'm unlinked, I'm in modulation mode for the input type, and I'll come out of 1 into the filters cutoff. And just because the input is now up, even without recording, you can hear and see the result of that motion. So I use this like a live CV recorder. You could move a fader on a DC offset source, or even just leave it up and play the input level knob. Let's play the fader here and record something in. That's going to loop, so let's just unpatch. Let's patch from the orbit into data, and then from data back now. And just like audio, we can select little loops of this. You can modulate the start and length. You can re-speed that up. Really slow it down. Be a really creative way to work with modulation. Let's record another. This time we'll record, say, an LFO, patching to the scope first this time, from the scope to input 2, out of output 2, into both sides of the filter for now. And with the input up, we can hear the effect of that LFO. So let's record some. I'll play with input level here and the rate of the LFO just reaching off screen. So that's now looping. Again, let's repatch. So my live recorded CV modulates the left side. My LFO, where I'm played with level and rate, modulates the other side. Now just going to momentary, so these cut out for now. Let's actually cross patch them. I'll go into poly mode on each of them, and I'm doing this because it will play through once and then stop. In momentary mode, I'd need to hold down or gate the playback. In latch mode, that's just going to keep looping. So let's just do a poly playback. We'll go times 2 just to speed them up quickly. So if I patch the end of cycle, the EOC, out from one side to the play of the other, one side hands off to the other, and of course you can create kind of cross loop here. End of cycle from this one to play of the other. So when this one finishes, the end of cycle will fire the next one. And you can see they're now handing off to each other. And again, you can be more creative than this. You could be slewing that LFO, some of that motion's a bit fast, we could slow it down. Let's do a shorter length loop. Just adding some slew here. We could take an end of cycle output and say drive a sequencer, so I'll just set that up. So what's happening now is, this one plays, end of cycle fires this side, this one plays, fires the next one playing, but also through this stacking cable, splits off to clock my sequencer, just changing the pitch of the oscillator. And of course all the timings are going to change depending on how I re-speed and play around with start and loop lengths. Make this much quicker. And again, like many things in this video, I'm finding this fascinating. It could just be a whole video and kind of world to explore itself. But even cross-patch this out, say to speed, like live pitch speed change one with the other. Let's try that before we move on. So I've now got these self-patched. They're both latching, so they're playing all the time. A split of output 1, the self-recorded one, goes to record the length input for side 2, and a split of output 2, the LFO recorded, changing the volt per octave, the speed of the playback of this one. And you can see it's creating all sorts of contortions and steps and kind of wonky behaviour in both of them. If you've got this far in the video, drop a VENO sync in the comments. How can you see yourself using the VENO Orbit or other samplers and loopers in your systems? Head to patreon.com/divkid for all the exclusives from this video and many more. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!